All right, you. Would you like your treats? Yeah? You like your treats? Yeah. All right, I'll give you your treats. I'm listening to Cliff Richard with the Carrie thing here. I remember that song. I was like young. I was like in my early teens when that was out. I'll give you your party mix, okay? My goodness. Funny, back in those days, when this song was made, it's kind of a song about a missing person. There you go, Rocky. There's treats. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, the funny thing is, in those days, that did happen quite often. People would just disappear. That wasn't unusual. It's a lot harder to do now, I think, but in those days, it wasn't uncommon. It's funny, there's a guy I know, and him and his son kind of got to be friends of mine, actually, and he used to attend the auctions. That's how I knew him when we had when I worked for the auctioneer. And this fellow, um, he has a wrecking yard and a farm, and he's an older guy. And he got married back in the 70s, and his wife disappeared anyway. She's never been heard from. She disappeared in 1976. Never been heard from again. Nobody knows what became of her. Of course, the spouse automatically falls under suspicion, and there are many people who believe that he took his wife's life. It's never been proven that he did, and his story has never been disproven. What he said is that they had an awful fight. His wife didn't like living that life on the farm. Wasn't the kind of a life she thought it was going to be. It wasn't the kind of a life she wanted, and so they were fighting quite a bit. And one day they had an awful fight, and the last he saw of her, she was walking out to the road. She said she was going to hitch a ride out of there, and he just wanted to be anywhere but there, is what it was. And that is possible. A lot of people these days doubt him. They say, well, what do you mean? It doesn't make any sense. But you'd have to have lived back then to understand it actually is possible. And the thing is, in those days, too, there were a lot of people running the roads, and not everybody was a good person. Despite the way people romanticize the past now, the past was quite a dangerous place. I mean, the truth is, the odds of getting murdered in the 1970s were higher than the odds of getting murdered now. Our murder rate was much higher back then, and it was just a much more violent society. I mean, people don't believe that, but it really was. And my own theory on it is I think one of two things. Either the people who say he killed her are right, and he did, and he disposed of her somehow on the property. Or that's possible. I don't know. I mean, I like the guy, and I don't like to say that about him, but I don't know what he was like when he was young, so maybe. I don't know. But I do know that it's never been proven, and therefore he's entitled to the benefit of the doubt on that, and I do give him the benefit of the doubt for that reason. Now, the other possibility is that what he said is right, and she did walk out to the road, and she did get a ride. Possibly she got into the wrong car with the wrong person. Got into a car with a man, and he took her somewhere and did whatever with her and murdered her. That was very possible. That's a very possible thing back then, and that may be what happened. I do think she's dead for the simple reason that she's never resurfaced. Like, she's never, she's never filed a tax return or applied for a driver's license or applied for a job or anything, so, or sought a divorce from him or anything. So she was eventually declared dead just because of the amount of time that had passed since she'd been heard from. And the Ontario Provincial Police have persecuted that man for over 40 years. They put him through hell. And but they've never been able to make a case against him to say he did it. So either he's one of the world's best murderers or he's innocent. And really, I don't know which it is. I do know I get along well with the guy. I like the guy. I have no issues with him personally, and I do give him the benefit of the doubt because it's never been shown that he was guilty. It's just people assume that he is. That's all. But like I say, I know how it was in those days, and there was a lot of bad people running the roads. If she got into the wrong car with the wrong man, that's all it would take, and she'd disappear. And I also know that people did disappear in those days. That was not unheard of. Although to never ever resurface, even after all these years, to never to try to reconnect with her children who she had with him, to never have any dealings with the police or the government or anything. It's highly unlikely. So either she did a really good job of changing her identity and really never had any inclination to come back, even to reconnect with her children, which would be highly unusual. There aren't very many women that would be that way, although they do exist, so it is possible. Yeah, so I'm not saying it couldn't be. I'm just saying that it's not very likely. So for those reasons, I do believe that she's dead. I just don't believe necessarily that he did it. Although I acknowledge that he may have. I don't know that he didn't do it. So, maybe the OPP are right in this case, and maybe the people who think that he did it are right. But really, other than just the fact that the spouse is the first suspect, there's no way to know. It's just people are assuming based on that. And by his admission, they weren't getting along. He did acknowledge that. That was part of his story. Well, we got into a big fight, and she left. Basically, she said she didn't want to be here anymore, and she left. Anyway, it is possible that he's telling the truth. All I can say is, if he is, then that poor man has been put through an awful lot for nothing. And if he's lying, and he really did take her out, well, then he's gotten away with murder, I guess, at least in this world. But there is a God, and God knows all, so God doesn't really care for people doing things like that. So he may escape judgment in this world, but he won't escape it in the next. And he's an old man now, so he's close to being in the next world. So, like I say, I don't know. I do regard him and his son both as friends of mine. I get along well with both of them. I think they're decent people. I have no reason to dislike the man or to hate the man or anything. I really hope he didn't do what people say he did. I really do, but like I say, I don't know. But whenever I hear this song, it makes me think about that era and how people did disappear. There was a fella from Perth here, a fella by the name of Charlie Virgin. And Charlie Virgin was my Aunt Teresa's boyfriend. My Aunt Teresa and Charlie Virgin both had serious drinking problems, so they used to fight a lot and everything. My dad used to get called to go and deal with situations between the two of them where they were fighting, and I guess Charlie would beat her up or whatever, Anyway, in around 1974, Charlie left Teresa, and he decided to go out west, which a lot of young men did in those days, because there were opportunities out there in the oil patch and whatnot. He decided to go out west and seek his fortune, basically, in the oil patch. And he just disappeared. About a year later, a story came back to Perth that Charlie Virgin had been found dead in a car. That he had went to sleep in the car, and he kept the engine running to stay warm, and he had been asphyxiated with carbon monoxide, which again in those days was not uncommon. There were a lot of people died that way because we were using cars way past their expiry date in those days. And there were a lot of really rusty cars out there on the road. There was a lot of 40s and 50s cars that were rusted right out that were still on the road. And anyway, so it wasn't unbelievable that had happened. Well, fast forward to around 1994, my Aunt Teresa, of course this is years later, so everybody's aged, she shows up at my door and she's got this man with her. I didn't know who he was. I didn't recognize him. I hadn't seen Charlie Virgin since 1974. So 74 to, yeah, 20 years, Anyway, she's standing there. She said, "Do you know who this is?" And I said, "Well, no." I said, how would I? How would I know who this is? And she says, "Well, it's Charlie." And I said, "Charlie who?" "Well, Charlie Virgin," she says, And I'm looking at her. I said, "That's not possible. He's been dead since 1974, 75. I said, man's been dead for 20 years. What do you mean it's Charlie Virgin?" And they both started laughing anyway, and he told me the story. It turns out it was a fella by the name of Eddie Dellier that had left Perth around the same time as him, and that's the guy that was found dead in the car, asphyxiated. But I guess people got their wires crossed telling the story between wherever that happened in Perth. And so by the time the story came back to Perth, it was Charlie Virgin that had been found dead in the car. So there you go. For 20 years, Charlie Virgin was alive, and we all thought he was dead. So it goes to show it did happen in those days, Oh, anyway. Yeah, it did happen in those days. But yeah, that song does remind me of that era, though. Pretty good it does, of that 70s, 80s era. And when I was young. And that was not an unheard of thing in those days for somebody just to disappear and never be heard from again. In some cases, they were found dead. In some cases, hundreds or thousands of miles from home, they'd be found dead. But sometimes they were just never found. And there's a lot of woods and swamps and places around here where anybody, whether it's a husband or some guy who happened to pick somebody up on the side of the road or whatever, could hide a body. There's a lot of secrets in the woods around here, I'll tell you. There's a lot of evil things have happened, and they've just never been uncovered. That's all. They've never been, there's just a lot of secrets that probably won't be revealed until Judgment Day. There's going to be a lot of surprises that day when we find out what happened to this one and what this one did and that one did and where this other one disappeared to and what they were up to and, how this one died or how that one killed them, Anyway, that's it. Yeah, I think I might do a Tin Lion and Tin Bug video of Carrie anyway by Cliff Richard. I just might. But what I have to do now is I have to make my breakfast. I've been wasting time here. It's now nearly 10 o'clock. I'm going to work at 11. So I need to make my breakfast and get that into me, and I need to at least get started on my door of my truck. So that's the plan anyway. We'll talk to you all later. Hope you're having a good day so far. And I hope none of you have disappeared. I hope you're all okay and none of you have just disappeared, All right. Bye for now.